Welcome to video 2 of week 2. We're going to go over customer segmentation, target customer. We're going to figure out what our beachhead market. I'm going to explain that a little bit more in depth. We're going to talk about industry, competitive analysis, the TAM, SAM, SUM thing. We'll talk about that a bit. We're going to talk about positioning, and then we're going to talk about assumption validation. So all the stuff that we talked about in video 1, we're going to focus on how do we validate that information and how do we line that up with the big data that we can collect from resources available to us from the university. So the first thing we're going to start with is the persona. This is something we want to pay attention to as the end user profile. Again, differentiating customers from end users. We want to be thinking about this broadly. So we want to find out if the end user is the customer, why are they buying? So is it because of a product savings? Is it because they have a personal image to back? Is it because they're being pressured into it because of their peers? Really what we want to know is what makes this person, this persona so special and identifiable. Really what we're trying to do is take stereotypes and figure out which one is going to be most likely to purchase our product as we start developing it. What we want to do is start developing out their story. So this is the sort of archetype attribute thing that we want to start thinking about. What is their title? Where do they work? What's their age, their average income? Do they have schooling? Are they on track to a promotion in their career? Is this a particular industry that people are in that would be focused on our product? Geographical location? Do they live in a different country? Do they read a certain newspaper, follow certain things on social media, listen to a certain kind of music? Do they socialize? Do they have any fears? And what are their priorities? There's a lot more that goes into the attributes of the persona archetype, but what we want to know is what is going to be the important characteristics that we're going to be able to focus on as we start the process of developing our marketing material and promotional content with our product. So this is going to be very important not only for that stuff, but it's also going to be important for figuring out who do we want to talk to validate some of the assumptions that we have come up with from the video before this. So the persona and your product. We want to know how the persona determines existing needs that are not met by those products. Remember, we talked about that a little bit before. What makes customers want to buy existing products and what makes them not want to buy existing products? What makes them unhappy with those things? And we want to know how that person's going to figure out that it even exists. Where do they search? What do they look for? Like we talked about before, what are those social media pages that they follow? What are those newspapers or news channels that they follow? Those are all going to be very impactful in figuring out how do we get this thing in front of them. We also want to know how they're going to use our product. If we're coming out with something that's radically different, there's a good chance that they may not understand how to use it. But using this process, there's a good chance that the thing we're going to develop is more incremental. The business plan that's going to be surrounding whatever this is also going to be a little bit more incremental. So the idea is hopefully they know how to use our product before they ever really get their hands on it. Let's think about the example of the BlackBerry. People understood how to use the iPhone because they were already on something that was kind of similar. Definitely not as much functionality back in 2007, but still the concept was the same. They were coming from something that was remotely similar to what they were buying in this new product called the iPhone, right? We want to know what's going to make them buy more of our product and what's going to help them spread the awareness of our product. So again, like I talked about before, here's kind of the 3 conditions that define a target market for efficiency of scale, meaning that we know that there's a high likelihood that somebody is going to buy this, and we know that it's going to spread rapidly because people have become accustomed to it and they know how to use it in the first place. So again, looking at markets that buy similar products, looking at similar sales cycles. So if we're looking at seasonal things or electronics, or think about the items that you buy before a birthday or Christmas or events like that, where there's kind of a seasonality to certain things. So looking at similar sales cycles, similar products, and looking at how our customers interact with other customers. So looking at that word of mouth. This is going to be very important for figuring out how we're going to grow this thing, because at the end of the day, our customer becomes our greatest influencer. Narrowing further, we want to get to a beachhead market. And what I mean by a beachhead market is a market that I know I can go to tomorrow to test my idea. These customers are dealing with an issue right now and want a solution today. These are people who are willing to adopt regardless of how perfect your idea is right now. Focus on that initial beachhead target market. So the next thing we want to think about is who actually hands you money for the thing you created. There's a couple different people that we want to be thinking about. This could be our champion, often our end user. This is somebody who's going to buy your product and shout it from the rooftops. Then what we want to think about is that primary economic buyer. Sometimes this can be the end user, but more than not, this is somebody who just makes the decision more on a business to business level. So somebody who buys something for an organization. What we want to be thinking about here is who is going to hand us that money. If we don't know the name of the person that is handing us that first dollar, then we don't know our customer well enough to be developing for them. Let's be sure to figure that out before we do a whole lot of development here. We want to be thinking of influencers. We want to be thinking of purchasing departments. We want to be thinking of the people who are buying what we are creating that are going to directly influence what we do in terms of design and development, okay? Just to kind of wrap all that up, everything that we've kind of done so far, unless we've started talking to our clients and they've talked about their customers and you've talked to their customers, is assumptions. We think, we believe. What we want to be able to say is we know for a fact. So it's going to be very, very important that we take all of the things that we've learned from our assumption generation, from figuring out what we think a customer wants, what we think their customer wants. It's very important that we go and test that, make sure that we're actually on the right track, because it's very easy to go down a rabbit hole that ends up sending you to building your first product that nobody wants. So make sure you're testing these things. So start thinking about open-ended questions that you're going to be able to ask your beachhead market, like we talked about before, right? What do they want? We want to ask them what they're currently using. We want to know why they use it. Why did they choose that? How do they use it? We want to know how they got it. We want to know what problems they think they have with it. What issues exist in that existing solution? So we're taking the concepts that we learned in that first video and we're really just turning them into questions. But turning them into questions that aren't just like, hey, do you like this pen? Yes or no? They're not closed-ended questions like that. They're very open-ended. They're very subjective. And we want to be able to objectify them, figure out what they actually mean, and is it something worth pursuing? Good places to get validation is in groups, specifically on Facebook, subreddits, places where there's a lot of like-minded people, where you can ask something really generic and get a bunch of responses about that thing. If you ask a group of people in a subreddit about cars, what kind of cleaning product they use, you're going to get a lot of responses. And then if you ask each person that responds to that comment what they love about the product that they just told you about, they're going to tell you a lot of things. And then if you ask those same people what issues they have with that product, they might tell you something interesting. They might not have really thought about it. They may say the packaging is a little weird. They may say that the consistency of the cleaner is not as nice as they'd like, but you're going to learn things that you really probably never thought you'd learn. So use those open-ended questions in a strategy where you're collecting lots of information. So those Facebook groups, those subreddits, those are really going to be great places to ask them. Surveys, they work, but they're not quite as good as those one-on-one interactions. You get a lot of those online, but you can do those in person as well. So being able to talk to people that buy existing products, they're going to give you a lot of information. If you can get somebody started on a problem, They won't stop. They're going to tell you everything that they know. Listen, don't talk over them. Other good places for information about things that are already out there: blogs, vloggers, tons of content on existing technologies, on existing things. Look for it. Find out everything you can about existing things out there. Another great place is product and service reviews. So as I said before, go to Amazon. It's your friend. Look for those 5-star reviews. Those are probably more or less why they have purchased those products. Look at those 1-star reviews. If they're not about the shipping time, they're probably about the product not meeting some level of expectation. So go check those out. Just an example of a slide that might work really well as we start to build some presentation out and start building out our business plan. We want to be able to showcase how many people do the thing already. So in the case of Airbnb, they got their market validation by talking to people who, or by looking at the numbers of people who used the temporary housing site called Couchsurfing. It's couchsurfing.com, 660,000. That's pretty awesome. That means that there are people, there's a demand for something that they're interested in making something similar to. Same thing for those temporary housing listings on the NYC and San Fran Craigslist, 50,000 in 1 week. That means there's some evidence that supports that they should start doing some development. They've landed on something where there's already a demand. It's time to go build. So that leads us into our next topic, TAM, SAM, and SOM. But they're going to be important, especially as we start to build out a financial projection, one that might be 2 to 3 to 4 years. So the first is TAM, total addressable market, and that's the total possible demand for your product or service, disregarding any barriers to entry. So this is anyone in the world that could potentially buy or utilize your product. Our service addressable market, or SAM, is how many customers can you reach using your current business model, or the one that you're thinking about developing, within that total addressable market, and what you would need to obtain that market. So it's going to be a little bit smaller than your total addressable market, and it's going to be slightly more reasonable. It'll be something that may be attainable in the next 5 to 10 years. It's not something that we're going to get day one. But what we can focus on, especially as a startup, is our service attainable market, SOM, the number of customers you can reach based on the initial limits of your business model. So if you are limited to location, you're geographically locked, you're selling things out of your car, or your house, or from class, you are geographically locked. You open that up to Shopify or a website, you are now opening up to the entire world, potentially. So figuring out what your business model allows you to do will help you figure out what part of that market you can start with. But again, that serviceable market, that serviceable obtainable market, is something that we're going to focus on heavily in this class. It'll help drive the economics of your business model. Here's an example of a TAM, SAM, SOM as represented in a graphical form. This is from one of our students that participated in the Runway program a few years ago. They were interested in showcasing the number of universities as they were going to be targeting them as customers. They found 5,300 in the US as a total addressable market. They found, all right, we're geographically locked, but we can drive. SAM, a service addressable market, and that was the entire state of Florida. They found about 135 that would be attainable there. And then our SOM would be that first place that we plan on doing business. And it happens to be FGCU in this particular scenario. There's different ways to showcase this though. Again, we're going to talk about Airbnb a little bit. They looked at those 2 billion trips booked worldwide as their total available market. Then they looked at those 560 million that were looking specifically for a budget-friendly and online booked trip. Then they went even further to say that there were 84 million trips specifically with Airbnb. Now this particular slide was made after they had already launched, so they wanted to showcase their particular market share that they have actually attained. This will most likely be an assumption for the purposes of this class. Okay, so what does this stuff mean for us? You can use this as a basis for projecting future growth, meaning sales, expenses, and you can compare that to the standard growth per year that we would typically find in an industry report. So we can come up with some pretty cool assumptions based on the information that you collect at a subjective level and objectify it, meaning that we're taking it from like, I think it's this to I know it's this, and then we're going to compare what we think is right to what the industry reports think is right, because that's going to help us define what may be the best case scenario for us to define in a business model for any particular business. So using the lifetime value of the customer, lifetime value of a customer for Tervis. Let's think Tervis is a company that makes cups located in Venice, Florida. Their definition of lifetime value of a customer might be somebody who buys a Tervis once a year. It might be somebody who buys one once. Whatever their definition of that lifetime value of a customer can help them figure out what they might be able to reach in terms of market potential by multiplying that by the number of customers they may be able to reach, okay? As you start thinking about your users or your customers, make sure you're giving them use cases. Figure out how they're going to use your product in terms of lifetime value. Are they buying your product once? Are they buying it 10 times? Are they buying it once a month for their entire life? And think through different scenarios and figure out if it's worth pursuing one over the other. Again, the idea is to figure out the lowest hanging fruit. It's the goal is to get to something that we know is going to be scalable the quickest. What we then do is take that industry analysis, so that IBIS World report. What we'll do is in class is we will work through how to use IBIS World. It's a tool through the university database. And we'll look at those relevant industries. We'll figure out how big they are in terms of dollar amount, how much they're growing, what's their life cycle, how competitive are they. We'll look at the big companies, the top 3 companies that have differentiated themselves in the industry that stand out. We'll look at what those industries have as target markets, because they have all this information. It's all available to us, and it'll allow us to line up what we believe is out there with what's actually out there. Something that comes from IBIS World looks a little bit like this, and it'll give us a ton of information that we can use to make those strategic decisions. Getting into a competitive analysis, now we go back to the product. We're going to focus on what makes us better and what makes those products inferior to what we have to offer. Looking at those competing products, it's a great way to learn what products are lacking, how are they currently being distributed, and how do they work, how do they function, and how do we incorporate some of that into what we create. How do you differentiate what you do? If you're trying to reinvent the wheel, how do you make it a better wheel? Tannis is a great example of a company who really did reinvent the wheel. If we look into them a little bit in our class, you'll see that they essentially came up with a tire design for bicycles that doesn't require that you pump them up with air. They differentiated themselves by coming up with something that is very much like a regular tire for a bicycle, but doesn't require all the maintenance associated with a traditional tire. Also doesn't get flats. We look at reviews posted by other customers. What are they unhappy with and what are they currently used to? We could generate a chart with an explanation. We can come up with those top 3 to 4 competitors, list out differentiators, benefits, and features. We want to rank things. We want to look at what features, what quality issues do they have, what pricing do they have, and if there's anything else you can determine. This is what a comparison chart might look like. We have product attributes over here in the far left column, and we have our offering as compared to everything else that's out there. Another way to showcase it, in the case with Airbnb, they looked at how they stood out comparing themselves on an XY plane. They have offline transactions at the top, online transactions at the bottom, affordability to the left, and expensive to the right. And they place themselves based on what they believe they could do in this market space. They also did another slide that showcased their competitive advantage. So that other one was competition. This one talks about what really puts them above the rest. In this case, they were kind of the first to market in this transaction-based temporary housing. They were very, very easy to use in terms of the ability to search for different things. They made it easy for hosts to get on board, which helped them build their two-sided model. And they did a really good job branding themselves. There's other things, but really they highlighted those key things that made their company that much better than what was out there today. So that's kind of identifying that problem, target market, and value statement in a nutshell. In the next video, we're going to focus on finance and how we can start to put numbers to things.